Olga Hernandez, a 66-year-old former school district employee, became an unlikely target of an FBI insurance fraud investigation dubbed Operation Wicked Trust. After working for the San Antonio Independent School District as a secretary for 30 years, Hernandez was elected a trustee in 2006. She held that position for 11 years until she resigned in February 2017 when she was indicted, arrested, and publicly led away in handcuffs. Operation Wicked Trust was a public corruption investigation that reached back nearly a decade, starting with a man named Josh Cerna, employed by a San Antonio insurance brokerage firm, Mullen Pension and Benefits Group, and who later became an FBI informant. Also targeted was a school district consultant, William Half, who conspired to rig insurance bids for school districts, including San Antonio's. Insurance is a complicated product, and school districts hired insurance consultant William Half. Half took bribes to provide inside information to the insurance broker, the Mullen Group, who used the information to rig the bid process on behalf of their clients. Insurance companies trying to win RFP bids. But the only problem with the federal government's case against Olga was she was completely innocent, and the prosecuting assistant U.S. attorney, Mark Roomberg, knew it and had no evidence for proof. A complaint was filed against Roomberg after the trial with the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility for professional misconduct. The power of the federal government when they come after you feels like a tidal wave. And when the government uses that process illegally to convict an innocent person, that's where the buck has got to stop. More than half of all wrongful criminal convictions are caused by government misconduct. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI, Olga's case was entirely predicated on the stupid assumption that just because Olga was friends with certain people, she had to be guilty of their crimes too. They were looking to fit a square peg in a round hole and didn't care who they hurt or what the outcome was. Here's Olga Hernandez to tell you of her nightmare experience.
When the FBI first came to my house, I was just absolutely horrified. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before. When they came, I really believed they were just going to ask me questions about the Mullins Group because I knew they had been looked at by the FBI. And I thought it had something to do with their IRS or something of that nature. I had no clue that they were involving me in whatever schemes they were into. They started throwing all these legal terms at me, and I had no idea what they were talking about. When I found out that I was indicted, that was even a worse feeling because, now we're talking, this is really something, I need a lawyer. They're going to come and arrest me. And I even asked the FBI man when he said that I was going to be indicted. I said, you mean I'm going to be on camera and I'm going to be arrested? And, oh, yes, And then that's when they started talking to me about trying to make a deal. And I said, I wouldn't do that because I wasn't guilty. I would have a chance to turn myself in, and they would let me know before I was arrested that they were going to pick me up. But when it came down to it, they didn't do that. All of a sudden, all these FBI people showed up at my door. I was in my pajamas again because it was early. And I remember telling the guy, why are you doing this? You said you were going to allow me to turn myself in. He said, this is what the prosecutor wants because you wouldn't cooperate. I didn't plead guilty, and I didn't point the finger at others, so I wasn't cooperating. So I was really outraged. This can happen to anyone. Boy, if I hadn't had the lawyers that I had to take care of me, I'd be in prison right now, an innocent person in prison. And it really gripes me to think that there are probably a lot of innocent people in prison right now because they get scared. And even the person who pointed the finger at me, I can see why he did it. If they told him, you're going to get 20 years, but if you go along with us, you get 5. He had kids that were, 5 and 10 years old. And I also wanted to for sure give the names of my attorneys because they saved my life. You know, Alan Brown from San Antonio and Bill Reid and his firm from Austin. If it hadn't have been for them, you know, they really knew my case. They studied it. You know, they knew the system of the board up and down, the school system. And I don't think that just anyone would have come in and put their whole heart into it like they did.
In this insider exclusive network TV special, Justice in America, Olga Hernandez's story. Our news team sits down with her and her lawyers, Bill Reid at Reid Collins Tsai, and Alan Brown at Brown & Brown, who successfully won an acquittal for Olga. In one of those Perry Mason moments that resounded in jurors' ears like Babe Ruth hitting a home run in Yankee Stadium, Bill said in his closing argument, you know, this system of government of ours that I've been talking about isn't just a concept in the wind, it's a core concept of our democracy. When the government uses the legal process in a corrupt manner and asks you, the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, to endorse it to convict an innocent person, that's where the buck stops. And that's why in this country we have the jury system we have, and that's why we have the burdens we have on the government to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that my client did anything wrong, which they have wholly failed to do. But one thing is absolutely true. At the end of the day, most likely today or tomorrow, you'll go home, I'll go home, the judge will go home, the lights will go off, and this courthouse will be closed. But from this day forward, for every day for the rest of her life, this day will stand out in Olga Hernandez's life. Bill and Alan have earned reputations as unyielding trial lawyers who repeatedly represent individuals and families against big companies and the Goliaths of the world, including the U.S. government, and repeatedly win. They have earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as some of the best trial lawyers in Texas. They have built substantial reputations nationwide by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down, and their amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide their clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Austin, Texas. It is my great privilege to introduce two outstanding lawyers, Bill Reid of Reid Collins Tsai and Alan Brown of Brown & Brown. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Both of you practice two types of law. You're a criminal defense, and you are primarily a business litigator, correct?
It's fair to say.
So tell our audience a little bit about your firm, Bill.
Well, I used to be a federal prosecutor a long time ago, and I found no personal reward out of having people in prison due to my efforts, not just mine, but the whole efforts of the government. And I actually found sentencing to be one of the more depressing things that I've ever witnessed or had to be a part of. So I changed focus to be a business litigator because I feel like financial crime is under-penalized, under-punished in this country. And I like to hold people that commit financial crimes accountable in the only language they understand.
And Alan, you're primarily criminal defense, correct?
I've been a criminal defense attorney. I was licensed in '69. I was board certified as a criminal defense attorney in in '75, because that's the first time they had certifications in Texas.
You've handled some pretty well-known cases. What are some of them?
Well, Johnny Rodriguez, the singer, and I represented another singer, Mo Bandy, and the president of our police union, Harold Flamia, was a big case in our town. He'd been kind of an enemy, and then I got to represent him. So it was because I'd got some people off for the kill policeman, and he didn't like that. So they had a big thing where like 100 police officers came to harass the trial.
So today we are here on the Olga Hernandez case. Tell our audience, both of you, what brought you together?
I mean, I met Bill through my daughter introduced me to him. I had a daughter that went to Yale, and she introduced me to Bill. And I liked Bill as soon as I met him. And I think he wanted to learn how to try cases. I think that's the reason he worked as a prosecutor for a while. And I told him, the only way you're going to get any real experience, you need to go to one of those places like Del Rio. And he went, and somehow he got himself right there. Because there is a border town, and it also has an air base. And so having Laughlin Air Force Base is there. And that way they'll have a lot of crimes. They're like state crimes. Because usually you have to go to the DA's office. But you can be a federal prosecutor. And I didn't know it, but they were going to have a judge that's real interesting. He got to meet her first, Alia.
Yeah, this Olga Hernandez initially came to you, and tell our audience a little bit about Olga. You've known her for some time.
She's a very, very good person, and she was a head of one of our school boards in San Antonio, and some judge that was a friend of mine recommends a few people that he thinks that we can help. You know, he doesn't want anything for it, just he wants to help the people. And he thought he could help Olga by calling us or having her get in touch with my office.
Bill, what was she charged with?
I think the technical charge was theft of honest services, but you and I would refer to it as bribery.
Mm-hmm. And tell our audience a little bit about the facts of the case.
Well, but before we get to that, I think you might want to hear the answer from my side of the fence on how we got into this. Because for a time period of many years prior to even meeting Olga, I'd been telling Alan, hey, I'd like to try a case with you someday. I'd like to work on something together. It might be fun. But I'm not interested in representing someone who's clearly guilty. I want one of those 1 in a million cases that you'll eventually come across. And that case eventually ended up being Olga's case. So I can recall Alan saying, hey, Bill, I have this case. There's 200 audio tapes. I think that this woman is actually innocent, and I need help. Would you meet her? And so we all went to lunch one day with Olga, and she really impressed me. Olga's the type of person that every time you meet her, even though I'm paleo and I don't eat bread, she brought me some baked product that I couldn't eat. Even after I told her I couldn't eat it, she'd continue to bring things like that. And that's just kind of the person she is. So I felt like I've been looking for this opportunity to help someone that needed my help, and I felt like I could be helpful. So when I first met her and learned of the charges, what made me so upset was the fact that a very intimidating, very large FBI agent came into her house early one morning and said to her, you're clearly guilty. You need to wear a wire and help us with the investigation. Forget about fighting. And her response was, but sir, I don't even know what I did. And he said, don't worry about that. And then she said, but I wouldn't even know what to say to these people if you put a wire on me. And he said, don't worry about that. I'll tell you what to say. Just sound believable. And the fact that that very large man, and Olga's not a very large person, was willing to intimidate her to that degree and then perp walk her on the evening news and torture her in a case that I felt was unjustified from day one, angered me. And so I put the full resources of my own resources as well as my firm's behind this case.
And having been on the other side, when you talk about the full resources, talk about the full resources of the United States government when somebody indicts and charges them and arrests them, et cetera.
So Alan and I have actually had this conversation many times over the years, which is think of people who you can recall who stood up to the federal government and all its power. Think Muhammad Ali at the height of his career. Oliver North, who took a guilty verdict at trial. People like that, whether you agree with their own philosophies or political views, they had the moral fortitude to stand up to the federal government. Olga did. She told the federal government, I didn't do anything wrong, take your best shot. That takes a lot of courage. And that sort of courage needs help. And that's what we provided.
One of the ways that they intimidate, the government intimidates people, whether they're guilty or not guilty, is sometimes they freeze up their assets, right? Saying it's a product of your illegal behavior, right? Which leaves you no money to pay a lawyer to represent you, even though you're entitled to that, right? And oftentimes you have to go to a public defender who has 100 other cases and couldn't care less about this. Why was this case, besides what you said, both to you, Alan, as well as to you, Bill, why was it so special?
Well, I could tell you that regardless of freezing assets, just the need to hire a lawyer requires a lot of cash, generally. What my firm provided in this case, if it was truly paid for at market rates, would have been millions of dollars. There's no way that Olga and Frank could have afforded what we provided if they had to pay full retail for it.
Yeah, well, you guys are kind of a rarity in this, in the sense that not too many people, as you thought, who were innocent, but you still stood up and represented them, represented her.
But you know what, Steve? This is the hardest part. You represent someone who's guilty and you lose, whatever. The person was guilty, they got the best representation, you put up a good fight. It's actually a lot more difficult to represent someone who's innocent. The pressure it puts on you of knowing that basically this person's life is in your hands. It's a lot more.
What did the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office claim that she did?
So their theory of the case was convoluted, but they did what the federal government does oftentimes, and actually I did it as a prosecutor and never enjoyed doing it. So they took 3 clearly guilty people, one of whom who paid bribes and 2 of whom who received bribes, to manufacture a story that they knew didn't add up, which is that somehow, notwithstanding the fact that Olga did not know these bribes were being paid, she was involved in a criminal conspiracy. So they got the testimony of these people, and then they added that to a theory of the case that kind of went like this. Ms. Hernandez received meals, entertainment, and travel that she didn't disclose and was required to disclose, and her refusal to disclose that sort of stuff was an indication of her guilty conscience. That was the theory of their case.
But let me stop you there. Was that the law at that time? Was that the requirement?
It was not the law.
Now, let me ask you another question. Didn't the U.S. Attorney know that?
So I believe he knew it, and after the trial was over, I sent a 5-page letter to the Department of Justice that they paid some lip service to and did nothing about.
In other words, he prosecuted her, he indicted her and prosecuted her based on a rule, regulation, law that didn't exist.
That came into effect subsequently in November of 2015, and not only did the prosecutor know it, but 100% the FBI knew it, both of them.
And this prosecutor's name was Rumberg?
Correct.
He's still with the...
I believe so, and I believe his moral compass points due south.
Okay.
It points in the wrong direction, for sure. And he has some other friends there, and another one named Bill Harris, and his points in the wrong direction, too.
Yeah, nothing is ever done, penalties, disciplinary action to these prosecutors, is it?
So I don't know that nothing is ever done, because there's a woman named Brenda Morris who prosecuted Allen in a trumped-up BS case. She subsequently prosecuted Senator Ted Stevens and got in a host of trouble, because in that case, the trial judge actually got involved in what happened and penalized the government for what it found to be out-of-bound behavior. But that's actually a rarity. I didn't realize the extent to which the federal judiciary is actually biased in favor of the government until this case on Olga's behalf. The judge literally co-prosecuted the case.
And that's what you're up against in these cases, because when, as in Olga's case, when you are arrested, charged, the vast majority of people think, hey, you've got to be guilty, right? Why would they go to this time and this trouble? In your cases, in this particular case, how do you deal with that with the jury? What do you say to them?
I mean, I talk bad about the government to juries, and tell them that they're big bullies and liars, and, that the government's, it's really a very dangerous country, and that the way they apply it and the way they prosecute people's terrible. They don't mind putting innocent people in jail, and there's ones there right now. And also, personally, they indicted me, and then when I wouldn't plead guilty, they indicted Gene, and Bill represented us in a civil suit, and he got me $1.5 million, approximately $1.5 million.
Is this for malicious prosecution?
It's under the Federal Tort Claims Act. But
so did you have to go to trial for that, or did
no? The government settled.
They settled it.
And we got, during discovery, this is when they settled it. They had other people come in. The district had been recused, and we found out as part of the discovery, they said, we've had Allen indicted for 2 years now, and he won't plead guilty. But they have a young son named Aaron, and he's an attorney that works with Bill now. and they said they won't risk orphaning him, so let's indict his wife. And they indicted Jean next. And they knew she was innocent. You could tell by reading the transcripts that they knew that, and they indicted her for the sole purpose of trying to bully me into a guilty plea.
You're a well-known criminal defense lawyer in the country, in San Antonio. That obviously hit the headlines, correct? Right? How did that affect your business?
I have clippings on the wall about my own prosecution. I have the verdict where I got a not guilty. And I also have an article about Bill getting me the $1.5 million. And I tell people they probably won't get that. And I do tell them the story of Randy Weaver, and that they killed, that I got probably almost as much money as him. They killed his dog and his wife, and I think a child. They killed a child.
Kid, dog, and wife, yeah.
And so I said, and they wanted to not give them anything. And then I think Congress had to get them some money some way. I thought that was a horrible deal in the government. But, I think the government does horrible things all the time and gets away with it.
But here's what I'd say, and back to your question, which is that this really kind of highlights the wisdom of our founding fathers, right? Because judges are absolutely jaded to the system and are cynical, and you almost can't help becoming that way when legions of actually guilty people come before you. To assume the next one is guilty is not an unreasonable assumption. And that's why the power of the jury is really important, because the jurors really do take their job seriously, at least in my view, and certainly in Olga's case they did.
He got them to take their job seriously. I think you have to be a certain kind of attorney to get them to take their job seriously like that. And Bill is that kind of attorney that made them conscious of doing their job right.
How did the case end up, Bill?
Not guilty.
Okay. And ever an apology from the government?
The jury was out for 5 or 6 hours. My daughter, who was 10 at the time, was in the courtroom for the reading of the jury verdict. All my kids were there for the closing argument. But it was near Christmas, and so they left to go to a family gathering because the 5 or 6 hours of jury deliberation were too much for the little ones to take. But the FBI came up to me after my closing argument, which I know you read, and he shook my hand and he said, "You did a very good job in there." And that was about the closest we got to an apology. But that judge, when he read that not guilty verdict, his hands were trembling with anger. After the first, there were more than one charge. After the first not guilty announcement, there were tears and outbursts in the courtroom, and he angrily responded to that, told people to shut up. And then at the end, he angrily said, as I recall, "You are now a free woman." And that was a pretty amazing moment.
All right. Well, congratulations to both of you. And we have with us today Olga. So let's bring her on right now. I am very pleased to have with us Olga Hernandez. Welcome to the show, Olga.
Thank you.
Olga, what an experience, right?
Quite an experience.
How long did it last from the time that you knew they came to your house? Tell us about that.
They came to my house in September of 2016.
This was one big, large man, FBI agent,
Big
right?
one and a little one. Well, they knocked on the door. First time they came to the door was like 7:30 in the morning. And I was still in my pajamas. I went in and looked out the window, and I saw these two guys in suits, and I thought they were actually like Jehovah's Witnesses or something like that coming to knock on my door. And I didn't answer. And I just heard them say, "Let's go, we'll come back." And so they left. And my husband wasn't home at the time. And he came in about 30 minutes later, and I told him there were two big guys came to the door in suits. I said, "I don't know who they were." He said, "Oh, okay." And we just kind of let it go. And about maybe 20 minutes later, they came back. They had gone to have breakfast, I found out later. And Frank opened the door, and they said they were FBI, and they wanted to talk to me. So Frank came and got me. He said, they're FBI, they want to talk to you. And I said, "What for?" He said, "I don't know." So we went to the living room, and Frank came in with me, and they introduced themselves, of course, showed me their badges and all. I said, "Well, what can I help you with?" And I don't remember exactly how they started, but started talking about the Mullins Group, which was a group of brokers, insurance brokers that had a contract with the district through the hospital, through the insurance, the health insurance. And I really didn't know why they were coming to see me about them. We had become friends with them. And so I thought maybe they were coming to ask me about their divorce case or, FBI, you think it's IRS stuff. I really didn't know. But, a few minutes go by and they sit down, make themselves at home, and they start taking out pictures and they start taking out, just information on me that they had.
Pictures of you.
Frank and I like going to this popular, happy hour place, J. Alexander's. And they said, we have you here going to a meeting. And I said, a meeting? And this is a picture of you getting there. And then we were just walking up to J. Alexander's. And we used to sit outside in the patio, so it wasn't like we were hiding in some back room or something, meeting these people. I said, that was no meeting, that was happy hour. And then they go to the next thing. Well, we have you here, and you were meeting Josh Cerna for lunch. And they tried to say that every time I met with them, I was dealing with them and telling them, you give me this or that and I'll give you my vote.
Did they accuse you at that time of being involved?
They didn't say they knew I was guilty. They just said that I was going to need a lawyer and I was probably going to be indicted.
They said that. First meeting.
And they said, but you can work with us. And of course, I didn't know all the terms at the time. They used mitigation. And they said, you can work with us. And if you plead guilty, you won't get more than 5 years. And I was like, it hadn't even occurred to me that I could be going to prison for something they're talking about. And they said, but if you work with us and you can point the finger at others, help us catch others, then you won't get a 20-year term. You'd only get 5 years.
They're threatening you, basically.
And I said, I'm not guilty. They were saying I had to plead guilty. I said, I'm not guilty of anything. And they said, and I said, and I wouldn't even know who to point the finger at. I said, I've never seen anybody do anything wrong. They said, that's okay. We know who we want you to sit with, and we'll tell you what to say, and you have to sound convincing. And I just, shook my head, and I said, I just, after that, I just kind of stopped talking because I felt like, they're trying to trap me into something. And
Did you ask them to leave?
Well, they asked me a few more questions, and I just kind of left it, at that. They told me I had received a gift from them, and I had taken it, and what it was a gift card from James Avery that I had taken from Josh Cerna, because it's a long story, but they had asked us to be witnesses in their renewal of their vows. And like 2 days after the renewal of the vows, they gave me this gift card. That's kind of how it went at my house. And when they left and told me I needed to get a lawyer, I immediately called somebody I knew. I said, who can I get? And they said, go to Alan Brown, because he's dealt with federal cases. He's the one you need to go to. And so lo and behold, next day I'm in Alan Brown's office. And not knowing how strong these charges were and what they were charging me with. I knew I had never taken a bribe. To me, a bribe was they give you something for something, and I knew I had never done that. I had spoken often with the attorneys from our district, and they had explained to me what I could and what I couldn't do as far as talking to vendors, accepting contributions and those kinds of things. And I knew I had never offered them my vote for anything.
Well, it is good that you were acquitted, obviously. Yeah. How has your perspective of the government changed as a result of this?
I don't like them. I'm so glad that we have juries that really looked over the evidence and listened to the case and knew what was going on, because I just felt like the prosecutor and the FBI, they lied. They were lies. And when I mentioned that, what I just said to you about how they explained to me that they would tell me what to say, and they said, the second guy said, and it doesn't have to be board members to point the finger at. It can be anybody, even judges. And I said that on the stand. And then they brought the FBI guy back on the stand, and he said he never said that to me. Right before my trial, my trial was going to start at 9 o'clock in the morning. 8:30 that morning, they called my attorneys over to the side outside the courthouse, and they told them that they were going to give me one more chance to plead guilty, and this time I wouldn't get more than 10 years. And they said they had me recorded saying that I was part of the team, and they had me there, and I was going to die in prison. And they came and told me that. I said, Olga, this is what they're saying. I said, I knew I never used that terminology. I was part of the team. What team? I never had anything to do with them, and in light of their business, And so they went back and asked him, where does it give me the recording or the transcript that shows that she said that? They brought it back, and it was a lie. At the meeting they pointed to, it was nothing but the men in that meeting, and it was Sam, the owner of the benefits company, that said, we're a team. I wasn't even in that meeting. I wasn't even with them. So they were trying to use that to make me say I was guilty when they weren't even going to use it in the first place.
What you need to understand is that this gift card was bought and paid for by the FBI, given to Josh Cerna, who in a recorded meeting overseen and orchestrated by the FBI was one in which they were trying to get Olga to admit after the fact that she was part of this team. And during that conversation, he used the word team, or somebody did on one of these conversations, and Olga didn't say, wait a minute, I'm not part of a team. But she never used the word team.
When I was reading this case, I saw that the case had been going on for about 10 years, correct? And Olga was the last person that they indicted and tried on the case. The other, Josh and
Sam,
they took some pleas, or they went to prison, not too long, I think 24 months or some ridiculously low amount. So my question is this: why did the FBI or the U.S. Prosecutor's Office need to add Olga to this case when she really clearly was not involved? Why'd they do that?
So the FBI agents worked for a task force called the Public Integrity Task Force, whose mission it is to target public officials. And so because Olga was an elected official, that made her the equivalent of the 12-point buck, the person they were really after. So the real egregious part of this case is that Mr. Half was caught paying the bribes in 2010. The FBI told him to keep paying the bribes for several more years and allowing these contracts that they said were so evil to persist for a period of years, and allowed Mr. Cerna and Mr. whatever the guy's other name is, to Mullins, to sell these same insurance products to the district for like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, so they could nab a public official. That was it, right? How ridiculous. Well, listen, I am very sorry you had to go through this. You are now seeing the justice system as it is, which isn't fair. But thank God you had Bill and Alan there to get you acquitted, because, this is totally ridiculous. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
To both of you, when you are accused by the government, whether it's a state prosecutor, local prosecutor, federal government, whatever, and you are arrested, it's pretty traumatic. What is your advice to anybody who has been charged with a crime, arrested? What's your advice to them?
Don't talk, for one thing. They're not talking to the agents is not going to do you any good. They have no power. They're going to change or twist around whatever you say, and it's going to come up when you read how they write. When you read what they say you said, you're going to be shocked, because your first thought's going to be, I didn't say that. And then it's even close to it, they're going to change it around where it's in their favor. So do not talk.
I want to bring up one thing. Oftentimes, like the FBI or sheriffs or whatever, police might say to you, hey, we can make a deal for you. This can go easy or hard. That is a bunch of BS, correct?
They do that all the time. No,
they can lie. They can lie.
They can lie. Sometimes it's a lie, and sometimes a guy might inform, and he might be able to get some relief on his case. I can't say it's always a lie, but I think that he should talk to an attorney first and should slow things down. Now, even though I told you, and been a criminal lawyer for a long time and tried literally hundreds of cases. My wife, who's sitting right there, the night they came to my house with a search warrant, had to tell me to be quiet because I started arguing with them.
Bill, oftentimes law enforcement who comes to arrest you will say, if you're not guilty, okay, you have nothing to fear, okay? And if you want to lawyer up, if you want a lawyer, because you say, I want my lawyer. So what do you have to hide? How do you respond to that?
So, you know, I'm a business litigator, and so trial lawyer. And so I don't really deal with this situation that often, but I do think that what Alan's telling you is human nature, right? Human nature is to try and explain and to talk. And if you're not guilty, why wouldn't you be willing to explain? But I have seen instances where that has backfired. But candidly, in Olga's case, it really didn't matter. She told them she was innocent. She stuck to her story. Nothing she said to them really mattered in the end. And so in her case, it was fine that she spoke to him. But I would say that she's an exception. And I do think that my closing argument, which I know you read, about confirmation bias, is perfectly appropriate to describe that situation, right? The agent speaking to you is already suffering from confirmation bias. And anything you tell that agent or that investigator will fall into the nature of proving up what that agent already believes to be the case. Right. You're not speaking to an objective audience. So if you're not speaking to someone who's objective, what is there really to be gained?
I think there's another element that comes into play where, for example, an FBI agent or a law enforcement agent who's invested a lot of time in a case, and if the case falls apart or if the person is found acquitted, that's not good for that law enforcement's career, correct?
Correct.
So they are biased to make sure that whether the person's guilty or not, they get convicted, correct?
They want them to be, well, as some of them have told me, it's easy to convict a guilty person, but it's harder to convict an innocent person, and they'd be more proud of convicting an innocent person.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being on the program. You did a fabulous job. And Bill, you know, he was your mentor, a young lawyer, and this case just proved that when you are innocent, that you definitely should stand up for your rights. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.